people have been asking me, they say, is this a white pill? Is this a good sign? I don't know how it's going to play out. And here's why. You look at the federal government and how it's operated specifically under Joe Biden, and, I guess the federal government has kind of always operated like this on some level, which we talked about yesterday when we talked about the IRS looking at people's bank accounts and their checking account balances. Maybe the federal government has always operated like this effectively, but people didn't know about it. And certainly the federal government would deny it if people asked about it, and they would try to cover it up and hide it where they were doing it. Now they're doing it in the open. And what I'm talking about is the way that this administration is governed, they just don't care about the law, And like I said, people might hear that and roll their eyes and say, that's literally every administration since FDR and probably going back to Abraham Lincoln, and maybe even before that. Maybe the president has never really obeyed the law, and the administration hasn't. But what I mean is, in this case, this is like their public policy. They're like openly going out there. As an example, this summer, the eviction moratorium was set to expire, and the Supreme Court said in June that the CDC did not have the authority to extend the eviction moratorium. Because weirdly enough, a year ago, it was the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which implemented the eviction moratorium. You wouldn't think that a public health agency would have the power to suspend evictions from landlords, but they did that. Supreme Court decided in June that the CDC can't do that again. That's obviously unconstitutional. They obviously don't have the power to do that. And there was a big outcry, I think it was in July or August when the eviction moratorium was set to expire, that the Biden administration and the Democratic House of Representatives would not extend it any further because they didn't have the authority to. And at least in Congress, they didn't have the votes to do that. So Democrats were outraged, and they said, how could we elect Democrats? How could we put Joe Biden in the White House? How could we give Nancy Pelosi the speakership? And we're going to let the eviction moratorium expire when all these renters are going to be kicked out. And so the Biden administration came out like the next week, after they had already said that they couldn't do it. They came out the next week at a press conference and said, we don't care that it's illegal. We don't care that the Supreme Court told us in June that it's unconstitutional for us to extend it. We are just simply going to extend it. And they said that it will be challenged in the courts because it's illegal, and the Supreme Court probably will prevent us from extending it. But they said, we're extending it for about 90 days. By the time the eviction moratorium extension expires, it'll already be too late for the Supreme Court to adjudicate it. So in other words, yes, it is illegal. Yes, it'll be challenged. Yes, the Supreme Court will shut it down, but they won't be able to shut it down in time because we can work faster and more decisively than the courts. We in the bureaucracy, and this is a very important note, we in the bureaucracy can work faster and more decisively and in a more calculating way and in a more organized fashion than the courts. So yeah, the courts, they've already decided it and they'll shut us down again, but not before the eviction moratorium extension itself expires. They're not going to fix it in 90 days, so who really cares? And then they sign the order. And so I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. We've seen things that are similar, but Donald Trump never disobeyed the courts like that, which is a shame. He should have. And so now the Biden administration is plowing through. And then in this case, with the vaccine mandate, there's even a little bit of confusion about this. We know that in September, I think it was September 13th or somewhere around there, they did a press conference. This is the famous, basically the federal vaccine mandate announcement. They came out and said, if you're a business with more than 100 employees, you have to have everybody vaccinated or else you'll get fined. And every federal contractor and every federal worker, they will also have to be vaccinated. And the way that they were supposed to go about doing that was through OSHA, which is, occupational safety and hazards, whatever. That was supposed to be filed in the bureaucracy. It was supposed to be a new regulation they were calling coronavirus exposure like an occupational hazard. And under that legal pretext, that's how they were going to go and enforce this and fine companies that didn't do it. But the weird thing is they haven't even filed that rule change yet. That's not on the books. They went out and said, if you break the rule, we're going to go out and fine you thousands of dollars. They haven't filed that rule yet. And so businesses are not able to challenge it. You can't get an injunction on that order through the courts because it hasn't even been put on the books. So people are scratching their heads and wondering, well, why do you do a press conference announcing you're going to start fining businesses if you don't even put it on the books? Well, that's just it. They put out the announcement. They drafted the rule change. They're waiting to file it. They're waiting to file it so that businesses can't challenge it, can't put it in the courts, and maybe it gets shut down. But in the meantime, there will be adoption because businesses, out of fear of an impending fine or order and under pressure from banks and other companies and social pressure, they're implementing it in the meantime as though it were filed. So it has this effect where it's scaring people into complying, scaring people into going, companies in particular, business owners, it's scaring them into enforcing a vaccine mandate. But if they file it in the books, then they challenge it, so they won't do that. So people are afraid. They enforce the vaccine mandate, but businesses that are not afraid and are paying attention can't challenge it in the courts either. And then they threatened later on, I think this was either in September or early October, they came out and said, we're going to make the fine $700,000. Didn't file that either. That was supposed to be in a law, which I don't believe is even passed yet. That provision is also not on the books either, but companies are acting as though they are. Now you've got states like Florida and Texas banning vaccine mandates, although there is technically no federal vaccine mandate, and not even in the technical, unofficial way that they were trying to do it. That doesn't even exist. So to what extent this is going to go through the courts and how this is going to play out, I really don't know. And this is why I've been pushing it so hard on the show. I think it's still yet to be determined. I think that they still may back off if they are met with enough resistance. And this is just part of it. So like I said, this is not final, obviously, and this is still just a district court. But the good news is this is starting to be challenged in the courts. And honestly, this is what we want. We want it to go to the courts because at least there's a chance. And at the minimum, at least this buys people time. I mean, that's maybe primarily why this is a good thing, is everybody should be prepared to get fired for refusing the vaccine. I understand that not everybody has a plan B in the event that they lose their job unexpectedly for something like this. So at the minimum, if you're in a company or a state where there's an injunction like this or there's a ban on vax mandates, at the minimum, this might buy you some time to get another job or to look at alternative options. I don't know, tap into your savings, whatever. But this is good, obviously, for the people that have requested exemptions and for the people that did not request exemptions but won't get the vax to get everything together if they're going to get fired in a couple weeks. The other reason this is good is because I think that this could go to the Supreme Court. I think it's basically inevitable. And there are multiple avenues for how this might get to the Supreme Court. Maybe the federal government finally files their federal vax mandate, and that's challenged, and that goes to the Supreme Court. Or the state bans on vax mandates, maybe that'll go to the court. And then maybe a case like this will go to the court. I will say, though, I'm not extremely optimistic because we have seen, for example, universities. They've been challenged on their vaccine mandates, and in those cases, the students have lost. In particular, there was a college in Indiana where a group of students challenged the vaccine mandate, and the district judge upheld the Indiana University's decision to put in place a vaccine mandate. And I believe this was a private school. Or maybe it was public, I'm not sure. But in any case, they upheld for colleges that they can put in place a vaccine mandate. So if a judge in Indiana does that, it is to say at the minimum, it's not impossible. Some people might think it's like a home run. Of course the government can enforce a vaccine. Of course a business, a university can do that. Well, at least with the cases we've seen so far, I don't know that every judge necessarily would agree with that. So we'll have to wait and see what the outcome of this case will be. At the minimum, we could say that it's buying people time. But I just want to remind people, in no way, shape, or form is this over. Because there's a lot of people out there that are getting vaccinated. To this day, I still get super chats from people saying, I got vaccinated because I want to keep my job or whatever. And I guess the overarching point is this is still far from over. From a legal point of view, political, and also from the point of view of the economy, this has not been settled because there are still millions of people. There's still a serious percentage of the population which has not been vaccinated. And whichever way you cut it, there could be an outcome in the court which will help us. And if every worker refuses to get vaccinated, even in spite of being fired, if they all do that, that'll shut down the economy. Government can't do that. And there may be other possible avenues too, if in the next election, and I don't like to put too much faith in the elections, and that's still a year away. But who knows? Maybe if that turns out to be a very unpopular issue, at least in Republican states, you might have a pressure, like in the case of Greg Abbott, for sitting governors or state legislatures to take action against the vax mandates. So that's why it's very important. Just like I said last year during Stop the Steal, this is one of these issues which is of grave consequence and which we can still move the needle. This is an issue where we can change the outcome. And when I say we, I mean like me, and I mean like the people watching this show. Small group of activists can still move the needle on this, and it's worthwhile to do. And I go into that almost every night, so I'm not going to relitigate that here on this show because we've done that like every week. But you understand the seriousness of this. We're talking about it, as I've said before, biometric security compliance system everywhere. Controlled by the government, controlled by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, the deep state, people that hate us. It's clearly worthwhile, if possible, for that not to come to fruition. And we have a chance to make that happen because when you look at it in the courts, when you look at the Southwest pilot strike, when you look at there are some unions fighting this, the Chicago Police Union is fighting this, other airlines are fighting this, and there's lots of workers protesting too that are not unionized. When you look at all the resistance happening in the economy, and then you look at the court orders being done and some governors putting in place bans on the vax mandates, you can see that it's still far from over here. So that's why, because I think that's a tricky thing. A lot of people might think to themselves, am I going to get fired for some kind of meaningless stand that is going nowhere against the vaccine? You can't look at it like that, because if everybody that opposes the vaccine is willing to get fired and go to a protest and sue their university or business or the government or whatever, if we're willing to fight in every way that we can, everybody that's not vaccinated, everybody that is a conscientious objector, then we can turn the tide on this and force them to back off. I really do believe that. Because it's a pretty big ask to tell people, get fired from your job, get expelled from school, have your life turned upside down. And a big variable in whether or not people are willing to do that is whether or not they realistically believe that it's going to make a difference. But I'm telling you that it is going to make a difference. It can make a difference. And you can see that every day. And it seems like the tide is turning a little bit. For a long time, every day it was this slow and dreadful encroachment moving towards a federal vax mandate. And it feels like just in the past couple of weeks, you're starting to see real organized resistance from unions, public sector, private sector, from workers. You're seeing protests. DeSantis and Abbott are stepping up, and it looks like some other state governments too. So this is far from over, and this is something that, we can turn the tide on this fully. So that's a Texas court case. And like I said, we're going to follow what goes on in Texas. I'm not extremely optimistic about the legal avenue. I'm not 100% confident that the courts are going to solve this for us, because they didn't solve anything for us. They haven't solved gun control. They didn't solve election fraud. They didn't solve anything. Immigration, the border wall, we could go on and on and on. And I don't know that they're going to come back and shut down the vaccine mandate. Where were they when the lockdown happened? How about that? I'm pretty sure it was unconstitutional for the CDC to shut down every private business in America, but that's gone on for 2 years now, almost. So I don't know if I place a lot of faith in the courts that they're going to shut down a vaccine mandate. I don't think much has changed. So we'll keep an eye on it, but I think the bigger thing is going to be the strikes.